Listen to the language of modern global policy. International treaties and corporate mandates are saturated with terms like sustainable, resilient, net zero, and human rights. This animated diagram tracks the material reality beneath those words. Planetary overshoot, wealth extraction, and global militarization are all accelerating simultaneously. They are rising alongside the very frameworks designed to stop them. Inside the highest halls of international governance, the sheer volume of output is staggering. We have more metrics, declarations, and binding targets than at any point in human history. Yet the biological and social foundations of the planet continue to degrade. These graphs move in opposite directions, the words toward repair and the material facts toward collapse. Increasing the budget for these meetings has not narrowed the gap, suggesting a structural disconnect in how we distinguish the world. To understand why these systems fail, we have to look at a specific pathology known as corrective capture. In the biology of cognition, developed by Humberto Maturana, there is a strict rule. There is no objective view from nowhere. Every policy, metric, and target is drawn by an observer with specific biases and blind spots. When you draw an administrative boundary to isolate and measure a specific metric, like a carbon molecule, you inevitably dim out the vast interconnected biological and social networks that surround it. You cannot issue mechanical commands to a living system. A community or an ecosystem is autonomous and history-bearing. When a bureaucracy attempts to force compliance from the top down, the biological reality resists and the policy breaks. Any policy designed to protect life faces a recurring risk. It will be captured by institutional survival needs unless we constantly test its labels against actual consequences. Restoration begins by distinguishing the living reality of a forest or a community from the administrative categories used to govern them. This chart maps the exact life cycle of how a noble idea decays. A corrective policy begins as a living concern, solidifying into a formal framework, then an institution. The tipping point occurs here. The system conserves its own existence over the life it protects. We see this transition clearly at the highest levels of global governance. By the end of this life cycle, the institutional vocabulary of repair remains perfectly intact, but the functional relationship to actual material healing is completely severed. This diagnostic diagram categorizes exactly how institutions lose contact with reality, mapping recurrent historical patterns called the mythic traps. First is the Procrustes trap. This occurs when living, breathing complexity is forced to fit a rigid metric. We do this in climate governance. Ecological disruption and community displacement are compressed down into a single line of carbon accounting. Next is the golem trap, the danger of human-made tools escaping the boundaries of living judgment. It is closely linked to the oracle trap, treating predictive data as inevitable destiny rather than a warning. When we optimize artificial intelligence models purely for efficiency, we encounter both traps simultaneously. The tool begins to dictate human governance with zero moral friction. Then there is the Cassandra trap. Severe ecological warnings are formally recorded, but institutions remain structurally incapable of altering their conduct. And the Hydra trap appears across global health, where we manage multiplying symptoms while leaving underlying engines of extraction untouched. All these traps share a singular root cause. A vital human function, measurement, tool-making, foresight, loses its answerability to life and begins conserving itself. The final vulnerability for any corrective framework is the golden calf trap. It is the hardest to identify because it targets the internal logic of the repair itself. This is the point of total internal inversion. The policy framework itself becomes an idol. An institution admires its own moral purity and conceptual elegance, while the world continues to burn. You can observe this at elite geopolitical gatherings. Preserving the institution's reputation and branding its agenda become far more important than repairing the material world. You cannot fix this by applying more top-down coercion. Applying mechanical force to a failing biological system only accelerates the damage. The biological alternative is wu-wei, or non-forcing action. Instead of forcing compliance, you cultivate the structural conditions allowing the system to naturally recover its coherence. True planetary repair requires respecting the inherent autonomy of biological and social networks. Attempting to mechanically reprogram them always fails. To prevent this institutional decay, governance requires a strict operational protocol called distinction hygiene. This graphic is the recursive life coherence audit. It is a mandatory evaluation process that must be continuously applied to the policy tools themselves. At its center is a single, non-negotiable metric: what actually happens to life when this distinction is used? The first evaluation parameter asks what the policy obscures. Every time you highlight a specific risk, you must identify exactly what other vulnerability you are pushing out of the frame. Next, you determine exactly who loses their voice. You must measure who becomes illegitimate or structurally silenced under the new framework. Then, you examine what necessary practices of repair the new policy inadvertently prohibits or makes legally difficult to pursue. Subjecting systems to this specific audit separates the institutions that are actually protecting life from the institutions that are merely protecting their funding, ideology, and authority. There is a material difference between achieving a polished administrative target and the actual physical restoration of a local ecosystem. Labeling a policy sustainable or peaceful has no functional value if it is used to mask an unchanged institutional path. Even high-stakes geopolitical alliances must pass this audit. If an alliance protects its territorial advantage while degrading the habitability of the planet, it is not securing the future. It is simply consuming it. A framework cannot act as a sovereign commander over life. It must remain strictly answerable to the living consequences it creates. To survive, human institutions must abandon the illusion of rigid control and become endlessly correctable by life itself.